also talking about grief this morning. It is Grief Awareness Week this week, and losing a loved one, of course, the most painful thing that we'll experience. And whether it's a recent bereavement or a more distant one, the run-up to Christmas can be especially difficult. So much focus on spending time with family and friends. And so we mark the Awareness Week this week, and I'm joined on the line by Yvonne Tulloch, who's a minister in Chichester, CEO of the At a Loss charity, the UK's bereavement support website, and delighted to welcome Yvonne onto the programme. Thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to have you with us.
Lovely to speak to you, Sarah.
Now, first of all, you have very personal first-hand experience of being plunged into grief when sort of family life is just going on as normal, the just minor concerns and worries. Just share your story for us.
Yes, thank you. Well, it was a long time ago now. It was 2008, but my goodness me, I remember that day so vividly, as bereaved people do when there's a sudden death. My husband and my children, we had a very happy family life, and my children were university age, 2 at uni and 1 in his gap year, and we had busy and successful jobs. And then one day, I received the news that my husband had been found dead in his hotel room whilst abroad on business, and he died in his sleep of a heart attack. It came completely out of the blue because he'd even had a health check just 3 weeks before, and we were absolutely not expecting it, and it just completely uprooted our lives. Everything went into freefall from that point onwards. We went from being a happy and highly functional family to everything being chaotic, and for me as an individual, finding myself not being able to function and facing this whole grief thing, which I thought I knew about because I'm a minister, and I realised that actually I didn't know much about it, and in fact most people around me didn't know much about it either. So hence the charity, just spending since then, once I got my life back together again, which actually took quite some while, deciding that we really should do what I could to address what we see as a national problem of people being grief illiterate, really not understanding grief and not being able to adequately support each other.
I spoke to someone quite recently who had the worst form of grief, had lost a child. And he said that as a result of that, he lost friends, people that he thought would be close friends, because they didn't know how to deal with it. That's how bad we are at dealing with grief in this country.
That's exactly what can happen, and it's not through anybody's fault at all. As I say, I think about it. I mean, I was trained in this stuff. I'm a professional. I was supposed to know about these things. When I realised that even as a professional, I didn't know, it sort of shows us quite how bad we have been. Fortunately, things are changing. In the years that we've been running the charity and At a Loss since 2016, we've been in the media quite a lot, and much more so recently, and that along with other people is making a difference. People are beginning to talk now, and the pandemic has helped a lot as well, because we sort of were suddenly confronted with, oh my gosh, people die. We've been for too many years, we try to pretend that we don't die until we get to our 90s, and of course for many people that is the case, but for a lot of people it's not. And the reality of life is that these things, happen, and we need to be better at helping each other out when it comes to it.
In some ways, we're running away from it more, though, aren't we? Because a lot of people now are not even having a funeral, so they're opting for sort of direct cremation, and those rituals that have built up over years and years and years. Someone said to me the other day, the Victorians had it good. You'd go into black, you'd signal that you were mourning. Everybody knew, and it became more part of life. Are we hiding away from death more now?
We certainly have been. The Victorians did do it well, and it's been said actually that as a sort of, it's the white British culture, and I'm white, so I can sort of criticise myself. Is that tends to be the worst at this? It's like that stiff upper lip. Some of the other ethnicities and other cultures, they do things better because they have traditions that we don't have. But what we tended to do since the the two world wars is because there was so much death then. We just sort of almost decided, like, let's just put it behind us and carry on and do the great British thing of just, of bracing ourselves and showing that we can cope. Well, that's not good for us because we think that we've coped with it when actually we've tended to, for most people, they bury it. You have to express your emotions. You have to process grief and loss for a healthy future. And what's tended to happen, therefore, is that we've got a nation of unresolved and unprocessed grief. And people don't realize that. But what has been happening recently is that the subject has been opening up more. And so people are talking more and people are doing more things to process their grief. And we're finding that with our initiatives, that we've got this initiative called the Bereavement Journey that we run, and it's so popular. It's, people flock to it because they're realizing that there's grief from years before that they haven't processed, that they just want to have an opportunity to do so and for their well-being for the future. But you're right when you say that, we're not doing too well at it, because there seems to be this polarization going on. On one hand, people are beginning to realize that they need to process their grief and they need to look at loss for their well-being. But on the other hand, we're still doing things that are practices that we're introducing that are not necessarily helpful. And like you say, direct cremations. Some people are having sort of funerals before they've even died, called living funerals and things. These kinds of things, they're part and parcel of our natural tendency to not want to go near death. And it doesn't help, because the one thing about a funeral that we still had and where we are having funerals is that you have to face up to seeing the coffin, and you have, and it's the point at which people really begin that acceptance, which is part of the grief process and the grief journey. And to not have to face up to the painful bit that we really would rather run away from means that we are continuing to run away from grief and not necessarily beginning to process it.
I know from doing this job that a lot of people, that grief, it's not something that just, it has a sort of linear thing where you go, right, it's a year down the line, that's it, that's the end of the grief. And I remember one of my standout moments of my childhood is my father died very suddenly when I was 9. He was knocked over and killed. It was very traumatic. And a year after his death, I was very upset at school. And I remember a primary school teacher saying to me, "Oh, for goodness sake, Sarah, pull yourself together. It was a year ago now." But actually the grief sometimes hits a year on, because that's when you think, oh, it's been a year. He's not coming back. That's not going to happen. And that stayed with me. And I still feel that, that was not necessarily a very good way of dealing with grief, just to sort of bat it off and say, right, you've reached the end of your time now. On you go, move on, get on with life.
Yes, I'm so sorry that you had that experience, and so many grieving people do have experiences like this, and it is because of our culture being so bad at it. It's not, the individuals, they mean well. People around us mean well. They're trying to help, but they don't understand how grief works. And as you say, it tends to be later. And so most people in society will think about grief happening around the funeral. And they'll think, oh, once you've had the funeral, that's that done and dusted, really. Now you get on with your life. And actually, as I was saying just a few moments ago, often it's the funeral. It's the moment when the pain, when the grief begins. And for many people, it just gets worse and worse as the months go by. And for some people, it just gets put on hold for a while because they're so busy, they have to get on with their lives. And then it emerges sometime later, maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, or whatever. And society's thinking, well, you should be over it. Well, actually, what's going on is a good thing. And what society should be saying is, that's a really good and healthy thing that you're feeling your pain, and want to support it and want to support you through that pain, so that you can get to a point of as I often say, is like comfortable remembering, of being able to just reflect upon the person without it feeling painful.
This is a difficult time of year for so many people who are going through grief or who've recently lost people who are struggling. How can people find out more? You are the CEO of the At a Loss charity, which I'm sure gives lots of support. How do people find you and get more help on this?
Oh, thank you. Well, we've got two main initiatives. We run the UK signposting website for bereavement. So anybody who's been bereaved, go to atalos.org, because there we have all the support services, national and local, that can help you with your particular scenario, your particular bereavement scenario, and an increasing amount of information and articles and things to help you with whatever's going on for you. And then we also, more recently, been running this community support program called the Bereavement Journey, which is in 380 locations across the UK just since last year. Hence